We are back on the Zero Hour with Eric Kingson joining us, co-director of Social Security Works, on the occasion this week of Social Security's 79th birthday. And Eric, before we went to break, we were getting into an interesting conversation about right-wingers then and now. And back in Eisenhower's day, when Dwight D. Eisenhower represented the responsible Republican view of things. He was by no means liberal, but he, for example, the 1956 Republican Party platform boasted about the fact that more workers were unionized, boasted about the fact that more people were now covered by Social Security than ever before. So he was, there was a common understanding of what it meant to be a society, what it meant to be a nation, what we owed one another, and there might be differences, policy differences within that. But, you had that common sense. And back then, we started talking about conservatives then and now. You mentioned the father of the Koch brothers, who was a Bircher. You also mentioned H.L. Hunt. And I remember that back in the early 60s, when I was probably like 12 or something, I picked up, so maybe mid-60s, I picked up a copy of his book, Alpaca, I think it was called. It was a combination of autobiography and sort of utopian fantasy, as I recall, but from his point of view. And I ought to go back and reread that, because I remember he had crazy ideas like only rich people should vote, and they should vote in proportion to, how much money they had. People just, he's a nut. But now you have Tom Perkins, the internet billionaire, and a lot of these other internet types saying the same things. You have that kind of radical libertarian view. Has there been a breakdown in the sense of what it means to be a community here?
I think so, but even more so, we have that frame being implemented with Citizens United and with the unlimited spending available, the secreted unlimited spending available to push an issue to the advantage of a candidate you support. We've had a breakdown in campaign contributions. So effectively, they have been buying, they have the money to buy elections, and they're using it. Not that Democrats don't use money too, but these folks have been using very targeted, extremely large dollars. Everyone has a right to their opinion. That's what our country is about. But no one should have the right to control the political process with a huge amount of money, or no one should have the right or should be trying to take away the vote from Americans. That's also a strong part of the mainstream right-wing agenda of the Republican Party. It's scary. It's very scary. We fought for voter rights in the 60s. The country changed, and it has changed, but we're taking these huge step backwards on voting. So there's a lack of civility. There is a lack of sense of connection with each other. And one of the things that does connect us, and here, let me take an optimistic turn here. As you know, Richard, I've spent 5 years working with my colleague and friend Nancy Altman, with Alex Lawson, with many other pretty wonderful people to help fight first cutting Social Security, and now spend some time through Social Security Works and all the other groups, Alliance for Retired Americans, to send the message that it needs to be expanded. When we started this last round, the idea of cutting it, the storyline was, how much do we cut? A whole lot? Do we privatize some of it? Do we cut it a lot? Or just what they would call tweaks. Tweaks were actually quite a lot. They really hurt people a lot. Now, as the American people's voice have gotten into this discussion, a lot of groups have done hard work to do that, to get Americans talking about it. We're now seeing members of Congress being increasingly reticent on the Republican and Democratic side to talk about cutting the cost of living adjustment or anything. And we're starting to see large numbers of Democrats, hopefully one day Republicans too, starting to talk about the need to expand protections, the need for things like paid family leave if you're taking care of a sick child or a disabled family member, or if you're sick. Senator Gillibrand has a proposal in there. It's not going to happen this week, but it is a core protection that nearly every other nation has, every other industrial nation. So these ideas are out there, and they're becoming acceptable. We're hearing large numbers of people in the House and Senate start talking about expanding benefits, and we're starting to see moderate members of the Senate, like Senator Begich, sponsoring expansion bills. So the thing that I think, in one sense, these modern-day right-wing and billionaires, they're pumping a lot of money into the economy for some really bad ideas, but they're probably helping our economies because they're putting a lot of money in. But the thing to be said about it is they're not gaining traction in the way that they had expected. They're frustrated, and the reason they're frustrated is outside of Washington, the American public gets it. You just can't sell the idea to Americans that they're doing very fine in retirement. Now, as Americans become aware of the retirement income crisis, some of the more conservative intellectuals on the right are saying, well, things aren't as bad as they seem. Actually, Americans have a lot of money in retirement savings. Well, people just have to look at their bank accounts. So I think we're on a positive edge there, and it's because Americans, and these are Americans of all political views, Americans are getting into this discussion. And so in that sense, it's positive. But the stranglehold that some of these very well-off oligarchs have on our politics is frightening. And the most frightening, or a frightening thing, we are a rich nation. Unfortunately, for the last 30 years, 2/3 of the growth of income went to the top 1%. Before that,
this is something, you're absolutely right. And I think it's very important for us to remind ourselves that this seems to be one of the things they don't want to talk about anymore, is we are a rich nation. It's just that all the wealth is, as you say, going to a very few people. But they'd rather have us believe that we've reached now the era of limits, as it was once called.
Right. Well, Richard, you're promoting class conflict here, aren't you?
Right.
So
exactly.
am I. That's the argument. This isn't a polite thing to talk about, but there's nothing polite about a family who doesn't have enough money to buy the kind of food they need for their children. That's not polite, but that's called people who just don't deserve it. These are folks, and not all of them. I mean, not every person who has a lot of money is a bad person or, whatever. But we are looking at where from 1949 to 1979, 2/3 of the growth of our income, when our economy was expanding very well, 2/3 of it went to the bottom 90%. Today, we saw all of that 2/3 go to the top 1% for the last 30 years. And in fact, everything went to the top 10%. The bottoms actually, on average, lost something. So,
and when we mention that, and they say it's class warfare, it's like the guy who steals your wallet, and when you ask for it back, he says, "Why is it always money with you?"
Yeah, it's the same. Yeah, no, it's really, and I think that's where that dialogue needs to be out there. The dialogue about taxes. Our tax policy has become a huge giveaway, mainly for the very well-off. All of us would prefer to pay less taxes, but we would also like to live in a society that has roads and decent medical research and variety of things, capacity to protect us if it's needed. That's the as they say, the price of civilization. Well, they managed to avoid it well. And so I think, to put it back to Social Security, there's not only nothing wrong, there's everything right with asking millionaires and billionaires to pay the same Social Security contribution rates as their secretaries pay. After earning $117,000, we contribute nothing in the course of a year. There's every reason to gradually get rid of that artifact. That in itself would address 4/5 of this projected shortfall we have in the system. And then on top of that, we could put you mentioned the 92% marginal tax rate. Right now, I think it's about 38 or 39% on the very
Right.
well off. There's no reason not to have a 10% additional tax directed at Social Security on the millionth dollar you receive in a year. You're not going to go broke paying 10% on everything in excess of $1 million. That would allow for a very large expansion. Similarly, we could all contribute a little bit more through our payroll taxes very slowly by putting in maybe 1/20th of a percent increase a year over 20 years or 10 years. There are many ways to adjust the system. The key thing is we have to understand it's what we want as a people. I guess a point I would make, and you've probably heard me make this, is too much of the discussion about Social Security is about dollars and cents, as I just did. Too much is about that without looking at the impact on human beings, on the American people, and without understanding that financing, as important as it is only a means to an end. The end is to provide broad protection and enable Americans to protect themselves against risk we all face as working people. And the other end there is also to have a civilized society. We believe Social Security puts a set of values into action. The injunction to care for our parents, to care for children, to care for our neighbor. Also the expectation. You work hard, but if you work hard, you get something back in return. All of this is important, along with core support for the idea of human dignity. And these are old-fashioned and very good values. And that, I worry when we have our discussions on Social Security that we move sometimes so far afield from its purpose and we get bogged down in the details. But the core purpose is to enable the American people to do something for themselves that they can't do by themselves.
Well, and I think that is a great way to put it, and I think we're coming to the end point. I think it's the ideal way to end it by saying that this is really, and one of the things that's drawn me to this fight for Social Security as well, that this is not just a fight for an outcome, it's a fight to restore some fundamental values, a fundamental definition of decency on the community and national level about who we are as a people, what our values are. And I think I've gotten a lot of that from you, and I thank you for that. And I thank you for coming on the program. Eric Kingson, Professor of Social Work at Syracuse and Co-Director of Social Security Works. As always, it's wonderful to talk with you.
And Richard, with you, and thank you for being such a wonderful voice on Social Security and many other things.